Jai Hind. In this lecture of the series of human computer interface, we are going to discuss statistical graphics in the user interface design. So, what is the first we have to understand what is the meaning of statistical graphics. A statistical graphics is a data presented in a graphical format, right? So, a well designed statistical graphics, also referred as a chart, graphs, consist of complex ideas communicated with clarity and precision and efficiency. So, when we have a large data, then we need to some tools and techniques to represent our data, so we can represent it powerfully for the users with the very clarity and the very efficient manner, right? And the second meaning of the statistical graphics is it gives its viewer the greatest number of ideas in the shortest time and in the smallest space, and with least possible clutter. It will also induce the viewer to think substances, not techniques or methodology. So they can easily visualize their data and without any confusion of their viewing power, and they easily generate new ideas from the available data. So they can use various models for the predictions or the various models for the achieving new things in their available data, or they have already worked in the particular field. So this is the power of statistical graphics, right? It will also provide coherent and large amount of information, right? By studying the together in meaningful way, and it will encourage data comparison of different pieces of the eye. Different people can visualize the data and analyze in different manner, right? So a well designed graphical system also avoids distortions by telling the truth about the data. So this is the meaning of the statistical graphics in user design. So in interface design, we also incorporate the tools and techniques that user may able to analyze their data, right? So this is the use of statistical graphics that reserved for material that is rich, complex or difficult, right? The power of graphics should not be wasted on simple linear changes. I mean, for the tools and techniques of the statistical graphics are meant for the large set of data. If you have a small set of data, you don't need to use statistical tools, right? So this is the theory. So now we discuss the what are the elementary component of the statistical graphics, right? So most statistical graphics have the least two axes, x and y, right? And the title of the particular data items for what you are analyzing or creating a chart or lines or graphs, right? And legend, what kind of color coding schemes are using, comparisons are there, right? And these fundamentals are not for the pie chart, right? General purpose component of the statistical graphics are there. So we discuss little about the axis, right? The values on axis should increase as they move away from the origin. Use the horizontal axis x to show time or cause of an event. The independent variables, the use of vertical axis y to show the cause and effect, the dependent variable, right? So keep in mind that in journal we show dependent variable in x axis, independent variable in x axis, and dependent variable on the y axis, right? When the x axis plots time interval, the label point should present the end of each time interval. So we represent data properly, we choose the intervals of the data so that we can easily show or plot the curve or graph or lines in proper manner, right? So if two-dimensional data, then x and y axis is sufficient. If we are going to represent three-dimensional data, then z axis is also required in the plane. Scales and scaling, right? So place stakes to mark scales on the outside edge of each axis. Employ a linear scale. Mark scales at standard customary intervals. Start numeric scales from the 0. Right. So these things we have to keep in mind. The scales are numeric and should be start from the 0. Keep the numbers of digit in scales to a minimum. Display only a single scale on each axis. For large data matrix, consider displaying duplicate axis. Provides ads for scale interpretation, right? Provide scaling consistency across two or more related graphics. Clearly label each axis in a left to right reading orientation. So these are the common fundamentals that we should keep in mind when going to use a statistical graphics. So how to use scale and scaling, and how to select proportion in the data. Provide accurate proportion of the displayed surface to the data they represent. Provide proper proportion by conforming to the shape of the data, making the width greater. Keep in mind, making the width greater than the height. So you, when you deciding the proportion, so you keep in mind your data must be displayed wide in the widely and not in the form of height. Lines, data lines should be heaviest. This is the common protocols when using statistical graphics. Axis line should be of medium weight and extend the lines entirely around the graphics. Grid lines should be very thin or absent. So grids should be used on demand, right? In journal, grid should not be displayed in the graph. Labeling, in labeling, employ clear, detailed and thorough labeling. Maintain a left to right reading orientation, right? Integrate the labeling with the drawing. Do not curve letter to match the shape of curved lines. Use only the typeface font and weights. Do not separate labeling from the data through ruled line. Provide information about the source of the data. Use legends for complicated graphs. So what kind of lines you are used, what is the meaning of the line have particular color. So there is differentiation that you have already done in the your curve or graph that must be labeled with the use of legends. Title of the graph, create a short, simple, clear and distinctive title. Describe the purpose of graphic. For what kind of data, for what purpose you have generate a particular graphics, that must be easily understandable with the title. Position the title above, centered or left aligned to the rectangle form. by the extended access, right? So how you will aid interpretation of the number, right? So display a grid on a request, permit a viewer to click on data point to display actual values, right? When you keep mouse the particular point, they display actual values. So numeric values automatically for each point are bar. Permit the viewer to zoom in on the particular area of a graph, right? Permit the user change the scale values. Permit the toggling between graphics and a table, right? So first you have to create table before going to plot a graphic. So there must be toggling facility in the interface, that when the user want to see a table and or when the user want to design the graphics on the basis of that table, they must be able to switch between the two modes. Now we come to the what kind of statistical graphics that interface should support. There may be many more. Then we talk about some important graphics, right? So first is curve and line graphs, second is surface chart, third is scatter plots, bar graphs, histograms, segmented bar graphs, stacked bar graphs, and pie charts. So let's first discuss curve and line graphs. So these are the simple kind of graphs, displays data curves or lines that must be compared in a single graph, right? Display no more than 4 or 5 curves in a single graph. Identify each curve or line with a adjacent table whenever possible. If a legend must be included, order the legend to match the spatial ordering of the lines. So keep in mind, there is no more congestion in the graph. If you are going to use curve or line graph, there is a limitation that you must 4 to 5 lines draw. When your data is, if you want to see the growth of the data with the time, right? Yeah, with the certain constraint, then you should use the curve and line graph, right? So keep in mind that this, your data should be grow in width, not in the form of height. So keep in mind while selecting the proportion for the drawing the graphics. So you can draw the line graphs and see the comparison between the various data growth, right? So with the different input. So this is the very helpful in comparison of the data. So you can display the difference between two data sets as a curve or line itself. Now we come to the second type of graphic, that is surface chart. Order to the data categories to that, the least variable is at the bottom and the most variable at the top. The largest is at the bottom and the smallest at the top. So this kind of graphic shows the your data in categorized in area wise, right? So largest data will remain in the bottom and the least variable is the largest data is at the bottom and smallest on the top. So you can see in that particular surface chart area 1, area 2, area 3 and area 4. So area 4 data has similar kind of properties, area 2 similar kind, area 3 similar. So this is the differentiation of the data on the basis of their properties. So when you want to segment your data on the basis of their properties, then you have to use surface chart. Now we come to the next category of the graphics, that is scatter plots. Limit use two-dimensional displays of data. When you want scatter plot, you are limited to use for the two-dimensional data. maintain consistent scale size intervals, provide distinguishable equal size plot points. If there is a more than one set of data on a plot, use different symbols for each data set. We saw in the figure how the scattered plot is scattered the data, right? So visual distinguish with points or particular significance through highlighting techniques. So this kind of presentation of data are visually appear in front of you when you use scatter plot. Your data is scattered in x and y axis, right? So if you want to categorize different kind of data, then you have to use different type of color for the different kind of data. So you after then you can find out your data and classify the boundaries of your data, and you can use various machine learning models for the classifying the data of the similar kind of classes. Now we come to the next category of the graphics, that is bar graphs. So orient bars are consistently either horizontally or vertically. Bar graphs may be horizontal bar graph or the vertical bar graph. When to use vertical, when to use horizontal? Let's say use vertical bars when the item being counted is a greatest interest, right? When to use horizontal bars? When the data labels are long, to highlight the information rather than the count, right? Use meaningful organization principle, so you can easily understand your data with represented with the help of barcode, right? Make the spacing between bars equal to 1/2 the width of the bars or less. If groupings of bars are presented, leaves space between the groupings only. So highlight the bars representing important critical data that we can do, right? We may use different colors for the different type of representation of data. Provide consistent ordering for related groups of bars. Display reference index if displayed, right? Identify each bar with the adjacent label. Place label below or the left of the baseline, right? So this kind of representation of data you can see in cricket score comparison, similar kind of graphs. You may compare for per over comparison and between in the form of segments 0 to 4 over, 0 to 4 to 8 over, what kind of performance of the teams are there in the terms of run, that then this kind of information can be easily presented with the help of bar graphs and easily understood. We can also use segmented stacked bar. We can use bar graphics for the different kind of data. Order the data categories in the same sequence, order the data categories so that the least variable is at the bottom, the most variable is at the top. So we must have to keep limitation that how many segmentation can be possible in the presentation, right? We use different coding schemes, right, for the different areas, right, within the each bar. Clearly associate the label for the kind of information. So this kind of multiple information can be segmented in the form of bars. Now we come to the pie chart. Pie chart is the very important graphics for the general information presentation. So pie chart should be used within the caution. If pie charts are used, they must add the 100%. Pie chart representation means your data is always is 100%, right? So use 5 segments or fewer, so to avoid confusion. Each segment should be take up at least 5% of the circle. Place the largest segment starting at 12. Directly label each segment in the normal reading orientation. If the leaders for label is small segment are necessary, orient them in as a few angles as possible. So keep in mind that your data is always 100%, right? If suppose you are asked for the data of your organization, if 5% people has filled data, then it will divide the whole data in the terms of percentage, and that percentage always 100. So this is the representation of the pie chart, right? Include number with segmented label to indicate percentage of absolute values. Texture or color coding are used for the different kind of data or differentiate the data. Highlight segment requiring particular emphasis through contrasting display technique by exploiting it. So after studying the so many graphics, so when we should use what kind of graphics, so you can easily understand by the this table that what kind of combination for what kind of graphics is most suited, that you can visualize from the table. And last graphics is the flow chart. Flow chart is very simple technique for showing the flow of the logic, right? So flow chart display so design follow the some logical order, minimize path link, right? It shows the flow of your logic when you are going to solve a problem, and you first have to write an algorithm, and you can identify the problems in your algorithm with the help of flowchart. Flowcharts follow the common flowcharting coding conventions to distinguish elements. Some fixed conventions are there that you have to use in designing a flowchart. Use arrow to conventions ways to indicate directional relationship. Highlight elements requiring particular attention through contrasting display techniques, and this is the very important techniques when you want to see the flow of your design logic. So thank you and all the best.